started its full implementation this year, and it is being managed jointly by a core team of colleagues from the from the three secretariats. So the program aims at strengthening the capacities of relevant national institutions and individual policymakers and practitioners to integrate and foster synergies between the Rio Conventions and the SDGs. So it also aims to establish a mutual learning experience between policymakers from national institutions and also practitioners supporting programs and projects at local level. So the webinar series on how to build synergies among the Rio Convention, it is one of many activities under this program. So in our first webinar, the session was entitled Integrated Planning of National Strategies and Policies under the Rio Conventions. And during that session, we learned about interlinkages between the Rio Conventions and how to build synergies in planning processes. For our second webinar, the session focused on accessing and mobilizing finance for synergistic projects. And this is our third webinar and the third and last webinar for the year. And we'll be looking at enhancing the role of local and indigenous knowledge in supporting synergies amongst the Rio Conventions. So some housekeeping before we start. To avoid any disruption and background noises, kindly ensure that your microphone is muted, and unless you are given the floor by the moderator to make an intervention. So a recording of today's session as well as presentations will be uploaded on our event page. And you will find the link to the event page in the chat. And lastly, please note that by participating in this event, you consent to it being recorded. So on our agenda today, we're going to have opening remarks, and then we are going to go into interactive sessions, presentations, and sharing of on-the-ground experiences. Then we will have a question and answer session. It will also be open discussion where you will be able to share your own experience or provide comments. And then we will finish by a fun quiz. So our speakers today, so I am delighted to introduce our distinguished speakers. First of all, we are going to have opening remarks by Mr. Alejandro Kilpatrick, who currently serves as the manager of a capacity building subdivision in the means of implementation division at the UNFCCC. We also have Mr. Ludwig Liagre, who is a development cooperation professional, founder and managing director of Rio Impact, which is a consultancy firm specialized on policy and finance for biodiversity, land, and climate. We will also have with us Lucy Mulenkai from Kenya. Lucy is Executive Director of Indigenous Information Network. She is also co-founder of Indigenous Women Biodiversity Network, member of the International Forum on Biodiversity and International Forum of Indigenous Women, and a UN Decade Action Plan Challenge lead on Indigenous peoples and local communities. And we will also have with us Barbara Campos, who is a program manager of BirdLife International, Sao Tome and Principe Project Office. And before we delve deeper in our discussion today, I would like now to invite Alejandro for his opening remarks. Alejandro, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Stefania. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to colleagues. It's a pleasure to give these openings remarks on behalf of the secretariats of the three Rio Conventions, the CBD, the CCD, and the UNFCCC. As mentioned, I'm the manager of the Capacity Building Subdivision, and we're working very closely with our colleagues from the CBD and CCD in the design and implementation of the Joint Capacity Building Program. I think it's obvious to say that synergies are a fundamental part of addressing what it's been called the triple planetary crisis. And this year is particularly important because we have the COPs of the three Rio Conventions happen in the same year, something that doesn't happen that often. Actually, the CCD COP is in its final days being held in Riyadh. And we also had already the COP16 of the CBD in Cali and the COP29 of the UNFCCC in Baku. I think it's fair to say that these three conferences have highlighted in different ways and forms the importance of synergies. But I think something that is important is we know that synergies are important, but there is still much to be done to materialize them. And this is one of the main objectives of this joint capacity building program, to help countries and stakeholders with knowledge, skills, insight-based practices, case studies on how to actually materialize those synergies, building on what is already happening on the ground, and information that the secretaries of the Rio Conventions can provide through, for example, these series of webinars, as mentioned by Stefania. These webinars are one of the elements of this joint capacity building program that is complemented by a web page that will contain a repository of best practices, case studies, and the intention is to work with other partners to take these capacity building activities to the country level. The program recognizes cross-cutting themes or issues that are common to the three conventions, the three multilateral environmental agreements, and one of them is the role of indigenous people, recognized by the three conventions, and looking at indigenous peoples as also holders of knowledge and skills that can be very useful and instrumental to materialize those synergies. So I'm very excited to hear from our experts today on how indigenous peoples not only can be engaged, but rather tap into their knowledge, tap into their skills as stewards of nature, and how I think in their view of the world, synergies are sort of a given. So I think there's much to learn from these experiences, and I look forward to the discussions and capturing all the insights that will also help further build and further enhance the activities and products that will continue to be developed under the joint capacity building program. Again, in a world where everyone's talking about synergies, we're proud to present this program as a concrete joint effort to help materialize them based on experience, knowledge, and skills already out there, particularly in this case of indigenous peoples. So thank you very much. Welcome, and very much looking forward to the discussions. Back to you, Stefania.
Thank you very much, Alejandro, for those words. And without further ado, I now give the floor to Ludwig, and he's going to help us with an interactive session. Ludwig, the floor is yours.
Thank you, dear Stefania and Alejandro. Hello, dear participants. It's a real pleasure to be with you today for this important session. And before we start into the presentation and then the case studies presented by Barbara and Lucy, I'd like to pick your mind, in fact, on two questions to get us started. The first one would be on what comes to your mind when you hear synergies between Rio Conventions. What comes to your mind when you hear synergies between the three Rio Conventions? If you can write directly your insights into the chat box, and then we'll see how to elaborate on this. So that would be the first questions. And maybe, team, if you can help monitor the chat box and let us know what ideas are emerging.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you. So, dear colleagues, feel free to use the chat, and then we can move to the next question. Do we have already some answers?
Yeah, someone mentioned integrated ecosystem management and nature, indigenous people's traditional knowledge, understanding how ILK uptake is coherent across the different national instruments, Like, yeah.
Interesting. Interesting. Thank you so much. These are already very interesting answers. And actually, we're going to elaborate. You're going to see examples of how indigenous people have used traditional systems to build integrated land use management systems. I would like also to have your view on that other question. What role can indigenous and local communities' knowledge play in enhancing synergies between the three Rio Conventions? So there it's really the question of what is the role of local communities and indigenous people, knowledge and know-how to support the synergies between the three Rio Conventions. What do you think about this? So there again, please use the chat box and we'll keep track of all your responses. Do we have already some answers? This one is not the easiest, of course.
Yeah. One just came in. Indigenous knowledge systems are based on whole society, whole ecosystem principles. They do not separate climate, biodiversity, soil, water, and ecosystems. Yeah. And another one mentioned their holistic approach to nature and its resources. Yeah. And indigenous and local knowledge could offer nuanced insights which might be otherwise overlooked.
Very interesting on the wisdom that indigenous people and local communities bring to the topic of synergies. Very interesting. So dear colleagues, yeah, let's keep these questions in mind for the whole webinar, because we're going to come back on some of these and we'll have the opportunity to discuss and address more of your questions also because we are aware this is also a topic that needs to be discussed in detail to understand what indigenous peoples and local communities can bring to synergies. And of course, as we mentioned in the opening, there are other dimensions to synergies that have been already addressed in the first seminar and in the second webinar. So we invite you also to look at the two first editions of the webinars as a complement to this one. So I think now the idea is to move to the first presentation to give you more perspective on the role of indigenous peoples and local communities for this important topic of synergies across the three Rio Conventions. So let's move into this. I'll try not to be too long because we want to give the floor to Barbara and Lucy to have their perspectives from the field. And we also want to hear from you and to learn from you on your experience and your expertise related to that topic. So first, let's acknowledge that indigenous people and local communities often have sustainable practices. They focus on resilience and adaptability, and they have practiced basically sustainable living for centuries with proven methods that conserve biodiversity, sequester carbon, and prevent desertification. So this is not new in the practices of indigenous people and local communities, these considerations around the three Rio Conventions, even though now we are bringing the discussion at a quite theoretical level, but in practice, there are many already proven practices to foster synergies. Some countries already integrate this aspect, this consideration very well into their planning processes for the three Rio Conventions, into their NAPs, their National Adaptation Plans, or their NBSAPs, or their LDN targets, or their National Action Plan for combating desertification. This is, for example, the case in Kenya, that has adopted a NBSAP, a National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, that integrates the traditional knowledge and innovations of indigenous people as a central part at several levels of the NAP, national actions, but also local actions community-based activities. The NAP of Nepal, this National Adaptation Plan, also recognizes indigenous knowledge as a key complement to scientific data to address vulnerabilities at the community level. The NAP of Nepal also puts a lot of emphasis on community-based adaptation options, which are promoted in different ways. And in the case of Mongolia, the LDN targets, the land degradation neutrality targets, also include specific activities based on indigenous people's knowledge, including degraded land, the restoration of degraded land, using traditional grazing systems. So you see they are looking into the details of the national planning processes. There are many examples of how indigenous people's knowledge and local communities' knowledge is already well included into those processes. Now let's have a look at the synergies a bit more in practice. And I'd like to show you two examples of systems which are very strongly supporting the use of indigenous knowledge for the synergies. And one of them is the Satoyama system, which is an indigenous Japanese traditional land use system, which integrates paddy fields with farmland, with woodlands, and a wise combination of irrigation systems, and all this in fostering coexistence with human settlements. It features a mosaic pattern of diverse land uses and associated plants. So it's really a system that provides this framework for a coexistence, wise coexistence between biodiversity and people. And it builds on a number of traditional practices, including copicing, but also the use of root systems for faster regeneration instead of replanting. It's also a system, so you can see here, for example, through this picture, through these pictures, you can see a rice field and adjacent woodlands in a typical Satoyama landscape, just to give you an idea of all these different land use types are combined together. The Satoyama system is also a very interesting system in the sense that it promotes sustainable resources management at the local level. It is a very strong ally of climate change mitigation strategies because it helps to conserve and enhance carbon sinks and forest reservoirs. But the system has been quite endangered for many decades. And especially after World War II, there was a big risk at the durability of this system. That's why the Japanese authorities, they decided to create the so-called Satoyama Initiative, which is an initiative to safeguard, to promote knowledge sharing on very important socio-ecological production landscapes and seascapes. Satoyama system is part of course, this initiative, but there are also other types of landscapes that are part of this initiative. Then I would like to highlight the example of the Ecuador's Amazonian chakra agroforestry system, another very interesting system in Ecuador that builds on the cultivation of cocoa in harmony and combination with other types of productions like timber, but also fruit, medicinal, and ornamental species, where taller trees like cocoa provide shade with the lower layers of vegetation that are filled with fruit trees and other types of crops. So this is a very wise system also because it's very positive for biodiversity, as it is a possibility, it gives the possibility to foster the regeneration of a diversity of plant types, and it attracts pollinators. The system is so positive that it received recognition by FAO as a globally important agricultural heritage system. So global recognition to support this particular system. So this gives you, through these pictures, an image of how these different layers of vegetation are cohabiting and positively interacting to support biodiversity conservation, but also, as you understand, having very good outcomes for climate, but also soil and combating desertification and land degradation. So the system overall mimics the natural processes of succession or restoration of forests, and it combines these different types of staple foods, but also timber trees, fruit trees, and other types of plants. And thus it offers multiple benefits, including for income generation, but also for the preservation of cultural values and social cohesion. It has a strong impact on climate change mitigation, thanks to these different layers of trees that operates as carbon sinks, but it also plays an important role for soil and water conservation. And it really fosters overall resilience and sustainability, thanks to the diversity of productions and crops that are playing a role together for food security and also income generation. So looking at those systems, and these are only two examples of many examples that indigenous knowledge can bring to us as solutions to some of the biggest challenge that we have in front of us for biodiversity conservation, for resilience, for climate change mitigation, but also for land degradation neutrality. So now let's have a look to how can we include this knowledge and know-how better in the processes that we use currently for project design, but also financing solutions. And maybe let's first recognize very important moves as part of the Rio Conventions. For example, you may have witnessed the creation of a new subsidiary body for indigenous peoples as part of the results of the CBD COP16 negotiations in Cali. So this new subsidiary body provides now a high-level platform for indigenous peoples to highlight their contributions to biodiversity conservation and to share their knowledge. Indigenous peoples now have thus a dedicated space to work together with parties and other organizations to promote better the use of their wisdom and knowledge into the biodiversity conservation and restoration processes. The other Rio Conventions also have similar approaches, even though not a dedicated subsidiary body. But you will find, for example, under UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, you will find the local communities and indigenous peoples platform that has been operationalized at the COP24, and that really is a platform to facilitate all the exchanges and the engagement and the promotion of indigenous people's knowledge into climate policies and climate actions. The UNCCD similarly emphasizes the role of indigenous people and local knowledge in several key processes for the UNCCD as part of its science policy interface, the SPI, that includes references to traditional knowledge in addressing the challenges of land degradation, promotes the traditional knowledge also in developing specific tools to monitor and improve land management. LDN programs, land degradation neutrality programs, also oftentimes include community-driven and traditional practices. So overall, we have many entry points to leverage indigenous knowledge for the synergies. First, thanks to the possibility to incorporate better indigenous knowledge into policy and project design, but also by conducting more research on the use of indigenous knowledge and know-how for the synergies, but also by incorporating better the indigenous knowledge in project monitoring. Oftentimes, it's very critical to work together with indigenous people and local communities to access a number of data and information to report on the Rio Conventions objectives. So at project level, you can imagine all the benefit it means to work very closely with local communities and to have the local communities in the leading seat as stewards for these projects. The preservation of that knowledge and facilitating knowledge exchange is also very important. And so that's why we need to build on all the existing forums to ensure that that knowledge is widely shared and then implemented at local level. Finally, let's look into some recommendations for policymakers and practitioners that should be adopted more intensely, more practically in daily operations, including on the importance to conduct research on traditional practices and indigenous communities' knowledge to contribute to synergies, but also the importance to disseminate indigenous approaches and good practices to stakeholders that can foster synergies, to provide training support for indigenous community leaders to engage with policymakers and influence the negotiations and the policy design in different ways, to ensure active consultation with indigenous communities in national policy development, and then further to promote indigenous community members as stewards in nature-based solutions, but also land degradation neutrality and climate action, project planning and implementation. Not mentioning, of course, the importance of financing and the question of benefit sharing and how local communities and indigenous people can actually be also in the leading seat in terms of accessing finance and designing also, for example, community-led funds that can trigger important financing to implement projects at the synergies between the three Rio Conventions. The question of tenure rights to empower indigenous communities for sustainable land management is also very critical. And finally, the importance to recognize and protect indigenous cultural institutions and norms for natural resources management. And with that, I think I'd like to pause here and give the floor back to Stefania for the next section of this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ludwig, for those interesting case studies with real life examples. So I believe it's really fascinating to learn how indigenous and local knowledge is implemented at local level in different contexts, as well as the different entry points that you have shared to leverage and integrate indigenous and local knowledge for synergies in the Rio Convention. So we will continue along those same line as we will now hear from sharing of experience from Lucy Malenka from the Indigenous Information Network, and also from Barbara Campos from BirdLife International. So I will first give the floor to Lucy for her presentation. Lucy, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to come to this meeting. And actually, Ludwig, you have done a very good job because you have summarized everything that we are going to say, and the way you said it is quite interesting. And one of the things that is very important to look at is to ask ourselves, why are we talking about the knowledge, the indigenous traditional knowledge? I think it's very important to be able to see why is it important to us, and even to indigenous peoples and local communities who embody traditional lifestyles among the different communities. And we do this because traditional knowledge identity as indigenous people. And it composes of so many things. I think when Ludwig was, presenting, we saw that there were quite some aspects in it. These are just aspects about them having the knowledge to know different aspects of biodiversity, land issues, and also to look at how they mitigate and how they adapt in different, climatical changes, and also to look at the different degradation type of the land that they go and what they encounter, which was never before. And of course, looking at the growth of the population, that is also causing quite a lot of impact in terms of looking at the land issues and also looking at the knowledge and the impact on climate change. All these encompasses together and bring us some aspects that are very crucial that we need to be looking at, and also look at how we can be working with it collectively and with a holistic view in terms of trying to manage it. And one of the things that is very important that has been brought up, and also Alejandro, I think, mentioned very well, the importance of having these synergies. Because if you look at everything that we do is related, is connected, and we find ourselves that working with the same issues. They are all connected, despite the fact that the three Rio conferences, conventions were put together to be able to help the different parties and different countries and different governments and also other stakeholders to be able to manage different issues at different times and at different conditions. But at the same, when years have gone by, we have seen that it's very important to look at them and see how the synergies can be put together. If you look at the issues of the Biodiversity Convention, is a convention that has its own unique way of working with indigenous people and working with traditional knowledge, indigenous knowledge on different aspects. And from the beginning, when it was formed in 1992, up to when it was ratified and different parties, conferences have been taking place, indigenous people have been back to back with the governments and working with them. And one of the key things in the Convention on Biological Diversity is the way it started from the beginning, looking at indigenous peoples and looking at their knowledge and seeing how it's in, and recognizing the fact that these people are very important in terms of protecting the convention of protecting the biodiversity. And that's why it's very crucial, because indigenous people have been able to follow that convention for years, and how we have come a long way up to where we are until now, where we have the subsidiary body where we can be able to look at many issues together. After working for a long time and having different provisions of the convention, it's now time that we put all together and divide ourselves and look at how we can be able to connect our issues together. And this knowledge that we have, this convention is very clear and very motivating, and also very encouraging in terms of looking at the indigenous people and motivating and having their innovations already recognized in what they do and the activities that they do. And the good thing that these have flown into forming some of the policy recommendations, and also being able to get into the tables of the policies, because of the contribution, the way they do it from the beginning at the community level, national level, regional level, and up to the international level, and that linkage between the two. The other very important thing about the synergies is that looking at the UN Convention on Climate Change, it's a bit different. It works a bit differently from the Convention on Biological Diversity, but they're adapting it in a very, accepting some of the way that the Convention on Biological Diversity works. Because one of the issues that we also notice is that with the climate, it's not that the indigenous people don't really sit right during the negotiations to be able to contribute directly like we do in our Convention on Biological Diversity. And this is something that needs to be looked at. But by having the local, by having that local community, and also to have the indigenous people platform is very, very important, because that has helped. It has really brought a lot of education, awareness, and capacity building, not only for indigenous people, but also for the governments and parties and partners who are attending to the different meetings. It brings that knowledge both to the young, the old, the women, and the elders. And whenever I attend that the convention and see the different people contributing and giving their ideas, like the last convention, the 29th meeting, was really very interesting, because it brought this diversity together. And then it also brought up the fact that some of the issues of biodiversity came in, because we are talking about lands, we are talking about resources, we are talking about how to manage them and what impact has already been made. And this is very crucial in terms of looking at those synergies, because if we have to really restore, if we have to really curb and try to mitigate and even adapt into climate change, we have to look at these issues together, collectively together, in a holistic and human rights approach, so that we can be able to put the things come together and implement most of the recommendations that are brought up. And what I liked about also the COP29 is that it came up with strategies on how to forward and look at a work plan that they can continue, looking forward and see how they can engage further. And this is the same thing that we had already done in the Convention on Biological Diversity for COP16, which was held in October. And as Alejandro said, the three conventions came at the same time, and they brought up quite some different issues and some very important issues and synergies of working together and trying to bring the recommendation together. And for us, having the subsidiary body was one of the wonderful things that could happen to us, because now we know there is a way we can all work together, bring the recommendations that are brought in the different conventions, and also be able to come up with strategies of how to take those recommendations and the issues that have been discussed down to the ground level, coming from the top and then going to the region and going to the national and going to the ground. And for one of the important thing is also that we have this local participation that attends to the both conferences. And indeed, as it was recommended, and the discussion between the indigenous peoples among themselves, well, they necessitated that they have to go to the UNCCD conference in Rio so that they can be able to have, to put in a mechanism that can be able to give them even more, can give us even more strength to study and to be able to bring up quite a number of issues that have been pending and have been really critical in terms of looking at issues of desertification, especially for those communities and indigenous communities who come from the different countries and the different regions, especially where we have impact on desertification. And what I liked about also their participation there and the way they looked at it, and Alejandro brought up, and I think Ludwig also said about the science technology, they decided they have to look at where they can be able to input, because the Desertification Convention was kind of unique. It doesn't have really a caucus. It doesn't have, a team of, like a forum where we have different indigenous people. They bring different CSOs to come in and discuss about different topics that they want. But this time, the indigenous people who were participating were also able to come up with recommendations that could be able to really help us to emphasize and to really bring the synergies together and closer to the other conventions. And they brought the issues of respect and recognition, and to promote and protect indigenous people's rights in the UNCCD policies and actions. And then they also, gave a recommendation to ensure full and effective participation of IPs, to include women, youth, and of course, issues of land-related processes, which I say again are very critical in terms of looking at the different issues of the local and indigenous people at the ground level. And these, they said very well and clearly and recommended that it has to be implemented at the local and national level and the inter-regional level. Because we all look at the environmental crisis, and this environmental crisis impacts not only one, but many. And of course, one of the other things that they mentioned was the recognize the indigenous people's knowledge, because these knowledge systems, they are there, they are spoken about. I think Ludwig gave very good examples. How far do these recognition go? Do we really have the knowledge holders, the people who are down on the ground? Do we recognize them? How do we keep that knowledge going? And how do we document some knowledge? Because you see, you cannot document everything, because there are some knowledge that they don't want to give. And normally they don't want to give because they don't know how this is going to be used. How can we work with indigenous peoples and local communities to look at this particular knowledge? And that is why indigenous people in different forums, they talk about the importance of recognizing the systems, and to make sure that at least there is the free prior informed consent, the epic part of it, so that at least we can make sure that everyone is aware and is really knowledgeable and is able to make sure that they recognize that knowledge and they give credit where it's due. Because one of the biggest problems is normally to ensure that they really are able to recognize that. So it was really interesting to see how this recommendation came, and issues of funding also came in the Riyadh meeting, and they wanted to make sure that we have access to funding, direct access to indigenous people's organization and down to their community level. Because one of the things that they would have the knowledge, but probably they cannot even implement anything, and they cannot be able to hold that knowledge for long because nobody really gives them the support of being able to manage the resources that they have, and also to be able to look at that knowledge and really store it. That's why for the International Forum on Biodiversity and also for climate change, we are very conscious of what information is used and how to share it, and how can we store it, and how can the governments be able to use it. And we say we must make sure that also the governments are aware that we also enhance their capacity by working together with them, by them understanding what exactly we mean in terms of looking at issues of knowledge, because it's very, very important and very crucial. And one of the good things is also we want the governments to understand, because there is a lot of process and there is quite a lot of recommendations that have come out, and resolutions, and also, policy recommendations that have come from these conventions and these gatherings. And all of them normally focus on the government. So we have to work on with them. And I think Ludwig also talked about the NAPs and how the national action plans for desertification, for biodiversity, and also for climate change. And especially the MP-SAPs, which we have been working very closely also in Kenya with our Ministry of Environment, because they are very important. These are where we give the recommendations. This is where we have to work closely with the governments to be able to get our recommendations from the ground and tell them what we really want and what they should also try to help us. So it's very important, and to also work on their management plans on different ministries that we are working with. And remember, it's not only the Ministry of Environment alone, but there are quite other related ministries of agriculture and also of others. The different countries and different countries have got different ministries that manage these particular issues. In fact, even the traditional knowledge and indigenous knowledge sometimes falls in a different ministry. It doesn't fall exactly in the Ministry of Environment and so on. Up to the state law office and others, they manage it in different ways. So we must look at those synergies and try to see how do we connect all these together? How do we make our communities also to understand? Because for me, if I don't get my community understanding on what is happening, it's very difficult for me to be able to come up and talk about it. I want them to understand. Why suddenly do we need that knowledge from them? Why suddenly are we talking about it? Why is the science coming here and asking for advice to talk to the people? There are very good examples out there, and it's very important to document them and to be able to work with the different key stakeholders to be able to have this as something that can be able to bring our communities in a level where they can also understand how they can contribute and how they can share. And remember, those communities also are partly, they are very knowledgeable. They are like research scientists. They are like, they have quite some information, which is very important from the elders, from the women, and from the youth are now learning slowly by slowly. And some of the areas, actually, they don't have to wait for anybody to come and try to help them to manage them, like land degradation and so on. And I think, Maria Stephanie, I think I had a few photos which I also wanted to show on the land degradation in some of the areas where we work in Kenya, the West Pokot area, and also in some part of the Rift Valley, which are really very, if you look at that land, you wonder whether there is somebody who lives exactly there. But you can see very clearly how the women here, like here, they are trying to manage how to make the, land so that it doesn't continue to be degraded, and when it rains once, it becomes a problem. So they work together as a team to be able to really make a difference in what they are doing. If we have the next one also, we can see, you can just have them run, Maria, so that you see, this is now typically how it is there. And they've been working together. When we went there about 4 years ago, we were really worried of how things can, but they come with a solution if only they are motivated. These are reasons where we say funding should go directly, because they have solutions. They have their own knowledge. And you can see the youth here. This is a very one which I want to talk about. Involving the youth is very crucial now, because we are involving them to also understand the knowledge that exists and that the elders are having. And they come up with innovations. and they work together as a team. All these young people you are seeing there, most of them are graduates, but they are jobless. They don't have work, but they are working with their mothers and they are working with the different women groups in their own community so that they can also bring that knowledge to them, because they can read, they can discover. You can give them an opportunity to look at the different reports, and they see how they put together and they learn from each other. So we need to look at that and share among the synergies of what we are discussing about the synergies between. Restoration is something that is very innovative. And you see, in this case, they have come together and they have collected indigenous seeds. They've come together, put them here, and now they have, they have tree seedlings which they can be able to distribute among themselves in order to restore their own lands. And this is really heavily, guided by the women and the youth within the different communities. I think I had another one more before I give my recommendations. If there was another photo before that. And it all depends, because in the different part of Kenya also we have different ecosystems. This is one of the ecosystems I wanted to bring you, is in the Masai Mara area, where we work with the different communities who have also come together to donate some land for conservancies and to try and work on issues of degradation, and also to stop charcoal burning, and also deforestation of their forest, because it's one of the existing community forests that has been really degraded and so on. And they have put things together, and they have been working very closely with the Kenya Wildlife Services, the government, the ministries, and we put them together so that they can be able to work and really manage their land. Here they are all moving, trying to monitor and try to look at the areas where probably there is an issue, but you can look at it and see how rich the place can be. So with a different ecosystem, with the different communities, interventions have to come in a different way. And also, this is very important, and that recognition is very, very important, to know that the different people, the different communities have to be approached in different ways, and that knowledge of theirs is something that they can be also, taken in a very important perspective. I just want to give the recommendation that it's very important for the other convention, the two conventions, to continue with their work in terms of working with the indigenous peoples, to include them on on discussions of policies, discussions of the conventions that the governments bring in. These are very, very important, and do support the recommendations given by Ludwig. They are very important, and I don't want to repeat them because of the time, and really want to say thank you very much for inviting me, and we look forward to make sure that we also work together. And it's important not to work with one person or one community alone, but also to work inclusively together, collectively together, with both women, youth, and elders, and all the stakeholders, in order for us to be able to succeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lucy, for this very informative and insightful intervention. So if you have any questions for Lucy, you can already put them in the chat, and we'll take them up during our question and answer session soon after. For now, I will give the floor to Barbara for her intervention. Barbara, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam. I will start to present. Share my screen, please, from that you can see, please. Yes. Perfect.
Yeah.
So, thank you, first of all, Lucy, for such an inspiring presentation. We started really well with Ludwig and then you. Also, thank you all for this opportunity for being here today. It was with great enthusiasm that I've agreed to share my experience in regulating hunting on the island of Santo Tomé, as you can see from the title, and how decisive the incorporation of local management was in this process. So Santo Tomé and Príncipe is a small archipelago of around 1,000 kilometers square, located in the Gulf of Guinea. And despite its small size, it's a true gem. San Tome is home to exceptionally high numbers of endemic species that are found nowhere else on the earth and is often referred to as the Galapagos of Africa. However, there are several threats to the conservation of this unique natural wealth, particularly endemic birds, and among them is the unregulated hunting. Here you can see a map on our location. So this threat, the unregulated hunting, is taken into account in the latest NBSAP, with emphasis being placed on monitoring the activity and its impact, as you can see here, as well as on the need to strengthen supervision of its legal framework. Among the measures taken by the country to achieve the NDCs is also the development and implementation of a national program for the sustainable management of forests, its resources, ecosystems, and particularly protected areas. So in response to these commitments on environment protection and biodiversity conservation, the project built capacity and capability to regulate hunting and protect biodiversity was implemented having as its ultimate aim to draw up a participatory roadmap for improving hunting regulation on the island. So our entire intervention was based on the fact that hunters find hunting to be an essential and durable source of livelihood and income for them, of course, but because of their lack of knowledge and absence of other alternatives, they practice it in a way that harms biodiversity. Therefore, when in contact with hunters in rural communities and particularly in the buffer zones of protected areas, we made the dynamics of dependence between hunters and biodiversity evident by highlighting two main messages. So the first is that if populations of game species are threatened using hunting, hunting itself as an activity that generates income and food also becomes vulnerable. At the same time, hunters can represent an opportunity for the conservation of game species rather than a threat. Our approach has therefore not been focused on ban hunting. No, it was on the need to introduce rules, knowing what to hunt, when to hunt, how, and where to hunt. Our entire action was thus based precisely on valuing and incorporating local knowledge in the production of the roadmap for improving hunting regulations on the islands. To do so, it was essential to involve hunters to provide them with information and knowledge that would allow them to contribute to the production of a proposal to improve the current law, especially with regards to species ecology. And in fact, not having this in mind was the law's major gaps when it was drafted. It didn't take into account the perspectives of biologists or hunters, and no one better than them knows the forest and the synergetic species. So we have a law that considers closing seasons that are not aligned with the reproduction periods of game species, that doesn't provide adequate protection for endemic species that are vulnerable, etc. And what have we done with hunters to contribute to hunting regulation? So being this capacity building project, above all, awareness raising sessions and trainings based on pedagogical interactive methodologies and innovative communication materials that encourage the inclusion of various groups and parties involved in hunting, making it an appealing topic of national interest. So the awareness raising sessions were dedicated to raise public awareness of the importance of conserving SCP biodiversity, and in particular our endemic species, such as the 28 endemic birds. And several of them are hunted, some are in vulnerable conservation states, and even one is in critical danger of extinction, such as the dwarf olividid that you can see here. Some photos of other synergetic species are here also for your information. The green pigeon, brown snake pigeon, and the olive pigeon, all endemic, but in vulnerable conservation status. So we carried out 10 community awareness sessions on 5 districts in which hunting is a practice. And these sessions aimed at sensitizing hunters, consumers, cooks, sailors of game products, but also children and students. To do this, we use interactive strategies and tools such as games, you can see here, which helps us to make it clear that we need to introduce rules in the use of natural resources, in this case, in the game species, if we want them to continue to be available and prosper. We also used a poster that was prepared by our team on hunting, how hunting can support conservation. During the community awareness raising sessions, participants were informed of the project's objectives and next steps, and 88 hunters voluntarily signed up for the next phase, the hunters training, in which the knowledge gained during the sensitization were dipped and directed towards species management. Here you can see oops. Can you please confirm that you're seeing here like an information pop-up message? No. I think now it's good.
Yes,
Yeah,
it's
so
good.
here I brought some of the most important themes in which hunters were trained, but this one here is really the top priority one. Here you can see the title, so ecology, conservation, and species management. That included a participative review and interpretation of the law with hunters. So with essential support, and I say here and stress essential, of a cohort of hunters and ex-hunters who call themselves hunting protectors, we were able to train 75 hunters. And here lies one of the best lessons learned on the importance of involving community agents. In São Tomé, hunters are not yet organized collectively. So relying on the support of community members with some kind of relationship to hunting made it possible to build relationships of trust and support with local hunters and mobilize them effectively. And I tell you that without them, the project actions would certainly not have been as successful as hoped. This training in the ecology, conservation, and management of game species was also the most challenging activity. First of all, we had to reach the hunters, get them interested in listening to us about how to adapt their activity to protect biodiversity and endemic birds. In addition, it was our mission to give them all the knowledge they needed so that this interest would produce some change in their hunting habits and allow them to analyze the hunting law in detail and discuss it, proposing improvements. And what was the result? It was not just a training, but a simultaneous consultation. A hunter's knowledge of the forest and species is extremely rich. At the same time, it was a great reward to realize the importance that hunters attach to the training when in several groups from different districts, they proposed training like these ones we provided should be a requirement to obtain a hunting license. So here you have some photos of great and funny moments on the trainings. The moment that still moves me a lot was when one of the hunters intervened in the middle of a session and said, "Hey, wait a minute. If I'm getting it right, we hunters, we are regulators of biodiversity." And I was like, oh my God, I was so happy. And so I then realized that all of the investment in pedagogical training methods had paid off. And so, what is the conclusion? Of course, a number of challenges emerged during the project, not least in terms of keeping the hunting protectors motivated. However, by using truly participatory and inclusive strategies, we managed to get them and hunters to see this intervention as an important and worthwhile learning opportunity. So putting community involvement at the center of biodiversity conservation interventions is essential to guarantee sustainable solutions, promoting environmental protection while strengthening social ties and also respecting local knowledge and needs. Conservation must therefore reflect the balance between the human needs and the needs of nature. It should be everyone's choice and not the result of imposing limits and restrictions that negatively impact the livelihoods of those who find the use of natural resources the only answer to their survival. And of course, doing this without previously considering the need for sustainable alternatives. As simple as it is, I consider this to be a basic lesson for all those working in conservation. And building a common cause takes time. It requires innovation, it requires motivation, and for that, invest in effective communication is also a great strategy. Here you have the example of a theater play and also a mini documentary produced in the framework of the project, highlighting its key messages. So they were both recorded, broadcasted on national television, and made available on YouTube. A species game for children. Sorry, here. Yeah, the species game, as you can see here, the board, was also developed with the aim of raising awareness in schools and tackling. Oh, I'm sorry. I think someone has the micro open. I'm just finishing. So as I was showing here, is the species game developed to also involve students and children, and especially because opportunistic bird hunting is still an issue, especially in rural communities. So I would have a lot more to share, but I will end it here, finishing with sharing that in Santo and Principe, life is also involved in other processes that contribute to the incorporation of local knowledge into conservation strategies, programs, policies, such as the development of innovative co-management modules for areas of high conservation value, or even the creation and operationalization of the Conservation Trust Fund that intends to contribute to the island conservation of the island's marine and terrestrial biodiversity, among others. So one of the disbursement windows foreseen for this CTF would be for the financing of conservation projects to be submitted by civil society entities that benefit local communities and involve them in the protection of our natural heritage. So, of course, I would be happy to share more details about the hunting regulation activity or other initiatives in the future. Please don't hesitate to share your questions, contact me. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Barbara, for once again a very interesting intervention and for showcasing what the work that your organization is doing in Sao Tome and Principe. So I will now open the floor for any questions that you may have regarding what Ludwig, Lucy, and Barbara have shared and the overall discussion that have taken place today. So. And also, if you want to share from your own experience or if you have any comments, please don't hesitate. Just raise your hands and we will give you the floor. I see that Nigel. Yes, please.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for organizing the webinar. So I'm Chief of Section for Local and Indigenous Knowledge Systems at UNESCO. We're the only UN entity that works directly on Indigenous knowledge as our mandate under UNESCO. What I'm not quite clear about is this issue of the synergy. So First of all, I'm not sure whether you invited the secretariats from the three conventions. So Lucy and Barbara gave really interesting presentations, but actually we're discussing the structural relationships between three independent conventions and how the UN system works. So despite the enthusiasm, and we're very pleased to see the outcomes of COP16, it's not clear that that body is going to deliver what some of those expectations are, hopefully. But one of the things that we would recommend is really a reflection on the effectiveness of the LCIPP. And I think in the opening comments, there was some misunderstanding. The LCIPP precedes the formation of the HA standing body. And as our colleagues from UNFCCC will clarify, that the FWG is a statutory body. It is a constituted body under the UNFCCC. And the point is that we have 32 years since the conventions were adopted. Only the CBD had very clear language at the beginning on indigenous knowledge. Fortunately, that emerged throughout the three conventions. But the question is the national uptake. So we have many, many examples of interesting projects or knowledge systems. We work directly with IPBES on all of the IPBES assessments. But what this seminar I thought was going to discuss was how is there an overall framework within the UN system, and how do we bridge the gaps between the agreed text from the COPs and the actual implementation side. And at the moment, I haven't quite got to that in the webinar. So we look forward to hearing what you have to say about that, and hopefully, I'm expecting that you're going to have the secretariats also speak with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nigel. So for your first question, I will give the floor to Alejandro and perhaps also Ludwig to answer on that. And I also see that we have our colleague Chad. So maybe just throwing you under the bus here, Chad, apologies for that. Maybe Chad can take the second part of your question. Alejandro?
Thanks, Stefania, and thanks for the question. Maybe it's worth clarifying, because I mean the Secretariat, this webinar is part of the activities that are being designed under joint capacity building program between the Rio Conventions, where the three secretariats are very much involved in the design and implementation of this program. So that's the context, and the intention of this webinar is to highlight how indigenous peoples, indigenous knowledge is an important element, a cross-cutting element when you want to help build capacities to materialize these synergies. So the intention of the webinar was not a general policy discussion, but maybe just an opportunity to showcase experiences in the context of how building capacity for synergies, where indigenous peoples knowledge is a cross-cutting and very important element. So in essence, the three secretariats are here. I mean, maybe not physically, because the CCD is happening, colleagues are there, and other commitments from CBD colleagues, but it's a joint effort and a joint initiative. And this webinar is the last of a series that took place this year, and the intention is to continue doing activities under this joint capacity building program, including collecting good practices, case studies. So maybe just to clarify, so this is more looking at, and actually something that came out of the CBD COP in Cali, one of them is recognizing the importance of building capacities for synergies in one of the decisions, and I think there's even direct references to capacity building for synergies. So just wanted to frame that, but yeah, as you say, Stefania, maybe my colleague and friend Chad, you want to add to the other question, if you're still there, Chad.
Thank you, Alejandro.
Yes.
Yeah, Chad, please.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Chad Tuptungumbu. I'm part of the team that supports work under the Local Communities and Indigenous Peoples platform. I echo what Nigel shared. I mean, in the future, I think it would be beneficial to have the substantive teams that are actually supporting these, but also echoing what Alejandro was saying, there was coordination among the different conventions. I do have some questions to the speakers, seizing this opportunity since we are having the conversation of synergies among the Rio Conventions. So one thing, of course, Nigel mentioned on the three the existing work programs, whether that's Article 8J or the local communities, indigenous peoples platform, what type of synergies exist. But let me ask a question regarding during the opening. I think Ludwig spoke about the Satoyama approach, and Sister Lucy spoke about give quite an extensive example. So one question to all the speakers, it's the synergies not only in terms of actions under these conventions, but also conceptually, synergies in terms of mindset, synergies in terms of ideas. I say that because at least under the work of the LSIP, we've seen the transition or the trend where there's a recognition of the knowledge towards the COP coming out of the Dubai. There's a recognition of the worldviews and values. So one question to you all, it's what do you see in your practices, the synergies, not only at the action level, but in terms of the mindset and values that guides that action? So that's number one. Number two, in terms of ways to facilitate that synergy or engagement, there was quite a mention about NBSAP, NAPS, and this type of capacity building. The LSIP Article 8J in the opening, they were also speaking about the establishment of a subsidiary body under the CBD. But on top of that, perhaps a question to Sister Lucy, it's at least in the biodiversity and the climate, you also have the IIFB and the IIPFCC. Those are the indigenous peoples caucuses focusing on biodiversity and the climate. So what type of synergies can they or can our indigenous peoples organizations can facilitate between those conventions? So in addition to NAPS, MBC's, LSIP, Article 8J, but on the IPO level. So that's second. And then finally, all of this, of course, happens, as Nigel mentioned, in the broader context, in terms of the GBF, the Global Biodiversity Framework, and under the climate, you have the GGA UAE framework on global climate resilience. So how does that play a role or provide the context in terms of synergy? So those three quick questions. Synergies between not only action but idea level, and then what role does IFB and the IIPFCC play, and then finally, in the context of the global frameworks, so what type of opportunity do they present? So over to you. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Chad. Lucy, would you like to take the second question?
Yes, I would take it, but I thought you had also a question. Ludwig was going to answer, Nigel, or do I go ahead?
I think you can start, and then
okay,
Ludwig will supplement.
Okay. Yeah. So I think Nigel has also asked some very interesting questions, and I like Chad also for bringing and seeing what synergies do we provide as the two forums who are working together. Actually, 3 years from COP26, that's when we sat all of us together and decided we have to start working together, climate and biodiversity, and have those two caucuses, making sure that at least we can work together. And as he says, not only looking at the question of policy, but also looking at the exchange of what we can exchange and look at different aspects that we can borrow from each other. And this we are continuing. Then that's how we've been also for a team from biodiversity, making sure that they participate also in climate change. And we also invite them when we have different caucuses. We also know that there are some of our colleagues who actually follow fully the climate change, and they also fully the biodiversity. So we kind of exchange and look at the different issues together. And why do we do that? Because if you look at the Convention on Biological Diversity, it actually recognizes the importance of really having the synergies together and having the relationship with the three conventions. And this has been going on for a long time. So looking at the three, not only having the executives present on how they are related, but also trying to see what more can be done and how can we be able to have those linkages together. That's why I was saying the linkage, they are all the conventions are linked together. And this is the reason why, out of these discussions, that we had a strong recommendation to make sure that UNCCD also recognizes indigenous peoples, to make sure that they are given the strength to be able to, they're given the power and recognition to be able to form these caucus where they can also bring out some of the issues together. And within the GBF, there is also, where it's one of the targets which focuses on issues of climate change. And I think it also brings up, as Alejandro had said about the synergies, to be more, I think we need to be more proactive and to have more activities that are visible. But for sure, in biodiversity, we bring it, the Convention on Biological Diversity and the forum brings it out clearly, because we know this is one of the, this is one of the problems that we have on climate change that really causes, the loss of biodiversity. And if we have to restore it, we have all to work together in a holistic manner to ensure that we understand each other and we do the same thing. And we want to encourage as much as possible the networking together and the working together. For Nigel, he also talked about this, the subsidiary body. It's still new, it's still there. We still are waiting to have a meeting where the parties and everything can be set in place. And then we can be able to bring some of these issues which are very critical and working closely together than before. So this is still in the pipeline, and we are also building it ourselves as a forum to have a lot of activities lined up, so that by the time it comes, we see which one and how we are going to work it. But it also all depends on the funding. That is one of the challenges, Nigel, that we have. And we really appreciate. I'm right now in ICBES meeting, and these knowledge systems are things that are issues that are being discussed here, and that's why we are here to be able to do that. I also didn't mention about a tour conference that we had, a summit in Bogota in Colombia, and I would share the document to you so that you can share with whoever is interested to see how we have gone to build about the knowledge, why it's important to have that traditional knowledge, and also having a lot of, recommendations where we mention issues of climate change and the Paris outcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Ludwig, would you like to provide some further insights for Nigel and Chad questions?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for this very good question. I think I wanted to emphasize that the key stakeholders and target audience for the joint Rio Conventions capacity building program is primarily national level stakeholders, practitioners, national focal points and their teams, in the sense of building capacities on very practical issues related to building synergies. So that's true that the layer of the international policies and negotiations elements related to the synergies and how to bring specific issues like indigenous people knowledge, they are there, but they are not very much developed in our capacity building content, But this may change in the future, because that's also a very important consideration. So thank you very much for the points you made. Very important also is to consider the diversity of topics that we are trying to cover as part of this Rio Convention Joint Capacity Building Program. That includes the synergies in planning processes, in project design, but also in resource mobilization and financing mechanisms design. The question of the trade-offs is also very important, or to address the trade-offs between the key topics of the conventions at national level. And then we are building a number of guidelines on how to build synergies in NBSAPs, how to build synergies in NAPs. And actually, we had a very interesting session in Baku on the question of how to build synergies in the processes of the NAPs. The questions that you raised on the GBF influence, for example, is key to us, because we have to consider how now we build synergies using the opportunity of the GBF alignments, the NAP alignments with the GBF, for example. So all these international policy development surely influence the type of guidelines and material we produce as part of this capacity building program. But that's how I wanted to bring in on a mindset question. I think Lucy already addressed this, and surely part of our objective is to influence the way local practitioners, NFPs and their teams are adapting their mindset to embrace the diversity of considerations needed to address the synergies between the 3 Rio Conventions and beyond, because we also are aware there are many other MEAs that need to be addressed and the SDGs as well.
Thank you very much, Ludwig. And I see that we have Alan and also Donna. So I will first give the floor to Alan for his question.
I hope you can hear me.
Yes, go ahead.
I have a colleague as well, and we are doctoral students from Africa. We study marine seascapes and indigenous knowledge, and I think that has not really been explicitly stated that UNFCCC is sort of addressing that, or even UNCBD and UNCCCD. So yeah, I really wanted to pose that sort of question. That is one. And two, I'm a bit biased because I've been privy to these negotiations. The way we are defining these terms, and I know there's a UN definition of it, I don't know how we can sort of have a metric that sort of collects all this into how is indigenous local knowledge, is it terrestrial, is it seascapes? How are we going to build on that wealth of knowledge, given we have island nations, we have least developed countries who are dealing with this, we have terrestrial countries who are dealing with this, and all that. So I think those two questions are my very fundamental things that we should be thinking about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alan. So maybe Ludwig or Alejandro, you would like to come through on those?
Thanks, Stefania. I think maybe also Chad could come up on that, but Ludwig, please.
Alejandro, please go first. I will just address the question of the seascapes versus landscapes.
No, please go ahead. I feel you're more informed on that. Please go ahead.
You know, the question. Thank you for the question on the seascapes also considerations. I hope the example of Barbara from Sao Tome and Principe also gives you some insights, even though the marine ecosystems per se were not necessarily addressed, but actually in the context of Sao Tome and Principe, there is a lot of considerations around seascapes and the question of synergies as well. As part of the joint capacity building program, we are also addressing the question of marine ecosystems and seascapes for sure. Actually, we had very good examples of littoral ecosystems for building synergies, and in particular, mangrove restoration case studies that were presented in previous training sessions. We will surely build further on these types of ecosystem as well. The idea is really to recognize the wealth and the importance of opportunities for synergies in a large diversity of ecosystems types.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great.
Steph, you are on mute.
Apologies. So yes, so maybe Alan, you can share your contact details in chat, and then maybe we can send you the documentation that Ludwig was talking about. Alejandro, would you like to come on this one, or?
No, I'd rather give the floor to our colleague Donna. That's has raised her hand, maybe
Okay.
just to follow up on other issues.
Okay, so Donna, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Thank you everyone for this webinar, and thank you for all the insights from colleagues. So allow me to highlight 4 points. So I think it's good, and taking off from what Ludwig said, it would be good to identify opportunities for synergies. But under that over and above the opportunity, I think we need to have clarity at the strategic level, because the three conventions have three different mandates. They have three different set of signatories. They have three different deliverables and all of those things. And identifying the common denominator between the three would be important. So we have intentionality and the strategic direction on why we are building capacities, and the common vision that we would like to achieve to connect the three conventions together. So it would be important for these two to really be clear, so we know the way forward, and we have a common vision over on why we're doing things. The second point is, I think, then, and this goes to the intentionality of the capacity building. It would be strategic. For example, the Baku work plan that was adopted in COP29. It has various opportunities where we can not just do capacity building out of the goodness of our hearts, but the capacity building that is anchored on mandates that were approved by the COP. So maybe finding similar work plans, similar mandates in the different conventions would be a strategic way to really bring this to. So we harness and then bring together our strengths, and collectively we work as towards a common direction. The third point I would like to highlight is one of the things Nigel pointed out, that 9 years of LCIPP and 6 years of the facilitative working group, we have learned a lot of things in terms of how to use indigenous knowledge and knowledge of local communities in the process, in shaping mindsets, work plans, and policies. And one of the things we learned is that indigenous knowledge and local knowledge are very context specific, and elevating the discussions on a values level is something that brings together the different sociocultural regions of indigenous peoples and also parties. Because if we talk of intergenerational knowledge, you talk about the oneness of nature. This and then how they apply would be very context specific, and this is where the indigenous knowledge, the specific knowledge that applies at the different areas, come in. But elevating the discussion at the values and worldviews level is something that was very helpful, and something that is anchored in the vision of the facilitative working group, and now drives the work of the Baku work plan and the LCIPP henceforth. And last point I would like to highlight, and again linking back to what Ludwig said, that you are working on finding synergies on how we can, and then anchoring on the implementation and development of the NAP. I think this is a fantastic initiative, and would be really great if the teams who are leading the work on NAP and the NAP 3.0 would be part of this, so they can really guide us on what they've learned over the past decades, and what we can bring in terms of the indigenous knowledge and local knowledge, and then the values and all of those things. And then we work alongside mandates and alongside institutional directions. So I think we really look forward on how we can build on from this webinar, and how we can really highlight the strategic nature of efforts and initiatives like this, because at the end of the day, we are all working towards, and this may sound rhetorical, we're working towards one planet. And I think having a common vision on how we will actually realize this would be important in building bridges and connecting the dots at all levels. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Donna. And thank you everyone for this very insightful discussion. And before we conclude our webinar for today, I will give the floor back to Ludwig. We have one last activity, and then we will be closing.
Thank you, dear Stefania and dear participants, for this very interesting and insightful discussion. It's a very quick wrap-up quiz that we wanted to do before we close the session. I will skip this first section, this first question. You understand why it's very easy for the level we have in the room. So, of course, the three Rio Conventions are the CBD, UNFCCC, and UNCCD. Second question we had for you is, what is the name of the coordination body between the three Rio Conventions executive secretaries? Don't hesitate to write your answer in the chat for those who know the response. You have three choices. For the sake of time, I will probably go quickly through the questions, but that way I hope it helps you also to reflect with those questions and to keep some of the knowledge in your mind following our discussion. So it's the Joint Liaison Group, the GLG, this coordination body. The third question is about what fundamental approach have indigenous communities taken to conserve biodiversity, adapt to climate change, and combat desertification. So these three dimensions of the Rio Convention. So you have there also several options in your screen. And the answer would be the use of sustainable and nature-centric practices. Of course, we can always discuss because there are surely other dimensions that could be applicable. The fourth question is about the key advantage of promoting indigenous knowledge for synergies. There also you've got several options on the screen, and among those, the use of adaptive and proven strategies seems to be the most relevant. But don't hesitate also to share in the chat in case you see it differently. You may remember this example of Ecuador, the Chakra agroforestry system. How does it contribute to biodiversity conservation? So there also you've got several questions. And of course, for those biodiversity experts, you've captured that it's about incorporating diverse vegetation layers that contribute attracting pollinators. We had also a fixed question for you as part of this quiz. What international recognition has this Chakra agroforestry system in Ecuador received? There are also different options there. To my knowledge, but maybe some colleagues know other recognitions that this particular system received. The one that was awarded is the globally important agricultural heritage system recognition. The seventh question we wanted to ask you is, what key elements are crucial for effectively promoting and integrating indigenous knowledge? So there are also a number of considerations around incorporating indigenous knowledge into project result management, into active consultation for project design, and in the question of the research, including local research on traditional practices. And of course, all of the above are important in many other dimensions as well that we discussed during this webinar. The eighth question, none of the Rio Conventions dispose of a subsidiary body for indigenous people. True or false? We learned today it's false, thanks to the CBD, the recent CBD decision for a new subsidiary body. The ninth question, what does the LCIPP acronym stand for? Of course, we have several experts in the room, so this one is very easy. Its response be the local communities and indigenous peoples platform under UNFCCC. And the last question, maybe a bit more tricky, which of the below are considered socio-ecological production landscapes and seascapes, actually as part of the Satoyama initiative? And the response is between the Satoyama system in Japan that we saw, the DESA system in Spain, which is a combination between cork production and cattle breeding, and the Haupua Hawaii system, which is also a very wise system of actually littoral agricultural ecosystem with traditional management. Then the three actually are part of these socio-ecological production landscapes and seascapes that are recognized as part of this Satoyama initiative. So with that, I'd like to thank you very much. And I hope it was an insightful discussion and we get a lot of your comments and feedback also for future webinars and future activities as part of the joint Rio capacities, as part of the joint Rio Conventions capacity building program. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Ludwig. So I would like to thank all our speakers today. Alejandro, thank you for your opening remarks, and Ludwig, Lucy, and Barbara for sharing your invaluable insights and experiences. And also thank you to Pehan and Fahim who helped in preparing today's webinars, but unfortunately they couldn't be with us today. And as well as my colleagues at the UNFCCC. Thank you, Janet, Julian, and Yingting. I would also like to thank the three secretariats of the UNFCCC, CBD, and UNCCD for their support and collaboration for this program. And thank you, dear participants, for your presence today, for your active participation today. And we look forward to more sessions next year. So until we meet again, I wish you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Thank you. Nice evening and a nice day, everyone. And bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
See you soon.